Hello, Ajit sir. Now we are live on the YouTube sir.
We are live. I'm ready to go. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good evening and welcome to the FICCI webinar on the National Education Policy NEP 2020. For those of us who have read it, it is truly a game changer for India. Rarely in all these years have I read a policy which is so exciting, so complete, and more importantly, so honest. And today, for a discussion on this, we have three outstanding people to tell us a little more about it and to really see how all of us together remember one thing. National education policy is not just an issue of the government. It's not just those of educationists. It is something that affects each and every one of us. And it's only when each one of us takes an active role in ensuring its implementation that we as a country are going to have success. So today we have with us Sri R. Subramaniam, IAS, Secretary to the Government, Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. And he was the former Secretary for Higher Education during this entire development of the new national education policy. So he's going to give us, I hope, some really exciting insights into how it was formed and what are some of the really great parts of it. We also have Sri Anurag Behar, CEO of Azim Premji Foundation and Vice Chancellor of Azim Premji University. Apart from the fact that Azim Premji Foundation is doing amazing work in education, Anuragji was also a member of the committee and the panel which developed the national education policy. And as I said, this policy affects all of us. So to more or less represent the rest of us and more importantly, the industry, which we hope are going to be big contributors, we have Shri Uday Shankar, who is the chairman of Star and Disney India and of Walt Disney Asia Pacific, and is the incoming president of FICCI. So gentlemen, thank you for being here. It's great to have all three of you. I'm going to start with some very specific questions because I think the idea of this is not either to blame the government or to say the government is doing great work. I think the idea of this is for all of us to really learn what this thing is all about and then see how all of us together are going to make this a big success. So let me start with Sri Subramaniam, and part of the reason is I think he has to leave by 7:30. So I'm going to get the maximum out of him first and then go to the other two. Sir, I'm going to ask you two questions to answer first. First is there has been, as usual, some unnecessary controversy about the three language issue. And it will be great if you can kindly clarify, for the country that this is a complete non-issue. And the second thing is, you've been so intimately involved with the development of this NEP. What are, in your opinion, some of the really great parts of this thing that people may or may not have picked up? I would request you to, if you can keep this to about 10 minutes max, then we'll have a lot more questions for the rest of us to go through. So over to you, sir. Mute, sir.
Yeah, Dr. Rangneckar and all the panelists, it's a great pleasure and to be with all of you, and it's an honor to be on the panel as Professor Rangneckar has been. You are a great leader, and we all sort of admire you a lot. That's at a personal level, but I have Anurag has been tremendous. I mean, if that 483-page book has come. A large part of that contribution has been done by Anurag Behar, and we have always looked up to him for a lot of support. And behind all the glitz and glamour, he is one person who has actually contributed a lot to the making of the policy. I think, and when I saw his name, I thought that yes, I mean I must definitely come in and then share the dais. So, friends, I just wanted to thank all of you, and there's so much is being talked about this policy. I think hardly any policy is so much noticed as the NEP 2020 has. Primarily, also, because it affects virtually every single household in the country. I think hardly any household is there which is untouched by the repercussions of this policy. So, therefore, there is a lot of public interest, and I think the government has really sort of kept it away from the public for so long. So everybody is just waiting for a blockbuster film which keeps getting advertised, but when the release takes place, it builds up that much of expectation. Professor Rangnecker, and I just wanted to, you raised two very pertinent questions. And the language, unfortunately, has taken all the limelight, especially from that part of the general public who have not read this document. When Anurag was there, I think on that day when we got the report submitted to the minister and then we put it on the website, the whole South India went in flames because nobody has actually seen or read what is there in this. In fact, this is one of the most forward-looking document in terms of the language policy. As you know, we are already in the framework of a three language formula. That means everybody has to learn three languages, and this is not today. I mean, this is what 60-year-old policy, 1968, the three language policy, where it said that you should know your local language, your national language, and international language. So three languages is what has been stated, and large number of states, except possibly Tamil Nadu and some of the northeastern states, maybe I stand corrected on that, have not followed this three language formula. But largely, rest of the country, like all of us who studied in Andhra, so we find that extremely helpful. When I came to Delhi, I find that I'm not at sea, from Andhra. So it has actually helped a lot of people by learning three languages, and I think it's a great policy. I stand by it, and it is a national policy. What the new education policy has done is that it has made it more flexible than what it was in 1968. It gave great amount of flexibility. It has named no language. So, and it basically recognized the fact that the children can learn languages at a young age. So, and then it has also given a lot of importance to the mother tongue. Unfortunately, the people who want to create controversy, they without reading it, so they have actually spread a lot of misconceptions. I hope and I trust that these misconceptions are now clear. So I would like to spend the rest of the 10 minutes that Professor Rangnecker has given me on some of the things which are not so apparent, but are very much part of which are the soul of this NEP. This is the soul of NEP, and something which is going to interest the industrialists a lot. So therefore, considering that this is a FICCI seminar, I would like to focus on those few points, and then hopefully if there is any clarifications needed that I could give. First thing is that this is a policy which focused on innovation. This is something which the entire industry always feels bad. The top rankers are least innovative. You are the class topper, but if you ask you to apply something, you cannot do it, and that is something which has been recognized as a problem in the Indian education system for a long time. So for the first time, the NEP has stated very clearly that promoting innovation is it's one of the fundamental goals. Second thing it said is that they don't want a bookish knowledge. They want application of knowledge for the real problems. This is again a very important thing which industry always feels wanting in the Indian students. Third thing it said is that it moved away from the input-based sort of a learning to an outcome-based learning. So what exactly are you learning? How are you able to solve problems? Is there critical thinking? Are you able to think logically? These are the things which are defined as the outcomes of an education system. This is again, far-reaching importance. The fourth thing that I would like to state is that for the first time, we have said that research is very important, not only in terms of mere declarations, but it has also talked about a national research foundation, and it is going to go to cabinet. I can sort of within this group I can say that this is going to go to cabinet and it will get approved, and we are going to commit large amount of resources for promoting research in not only in universities but also in colleges. So a research orientation to the education system is going to really benefit the industry, because today the Indians, when they go out, study in US universities, come out with patents, products, and then they become the property of the host country, the host country. Today we are able to do similar amount of research in India. We have all the credentials, we have the mental power, and we have the will to promote research on a big scale. So this is going to help the industry a lot of Indian 5 years. I'm certain of that, and I think this NEP has really started this trend in a big way. Fifth thing that I would like to state is that this is a policy which talked about internationalization without any qualms. Otherwise, we are always fidgety about internationalization of the education. Whether you welcome a foreign institution to India or not is a big debate. The entire right wing feels that no, it's a violation of the Swadeshi thing. But see the beauty of the policy. This policy has built consensus on this. That it's not seen as a violation of a Swadeshi or detrimental to the Indian institutions. It has looked at it as India taking part in the global education system. So internationalization is one of the cornerstones, and the regulatory system that is going to follow based on the NEP is going to facilitate this in a very, very big way. One or two things I would like to state, which is again of interest to the industry, and then I will close. I hope I have minutes time. So there is a lot of emphasis that has been given for vocationalization. See, this is something which is again more talked about than done. But here there is an amount of sincerity and sense of purpose when they talked about bringing a concerted effort to build teaching of skills from class 6 onwards. And it is not something which is prescribed only for the dumb guys. Everybody must learn skills. That has come out very clearly. And also as it steps to the higher education system, so there is the entire skill universities, the entire skill ecosystem gets built up within the higher education system, not outside the higher education system. So therefore, the people who come out of the system would be readily usable by the industry. So therefore, you should expect large number of people who would be found useful for the industry. I would stop at this. I know there is a lot of discussion about regulation and all that, but I don't want to develop on that because that may not be of interest to our industry friends here. I'll stop here.
Thank you, sir. I have to say this is a brilliant, succinct summary. After having gone through it, and as you rightly said, bringing it down to 64 pages from 400 and something. I thank you profusely for that also. But that was reading that first draft was a real pain. Yeah. But again, everything that anybody can get. Anuragji, let me come to you. I think you have been. By the way, I've been a big fan of yours, and I've been watching and reading about things in IDR or wherever you write. I keep following up. The big thing is creating a policy is fine, but you must have given thought to how do we think it's going to be implemented. I know it's not the policy does not It's not the job of policy to talk of implementation. Policy sets the way. But still, we don't create a policy which is not going to be implemented or implementable. So what were the kind of thinking that went on? What was the feeling? And I'll ask two very specific questions which are genuinely worrying me, and therefore I'm being honest about it. One is, and the policy has said it, that we have totally demoralized, and maybe I'm using different words, demoralized teacher force, not really engaged. We have faculty who do not do research. I'll just take those two. Now we want to create this new world, which is great. But who is going to create it? The same people who are demotivated, demoralized? How is that process going to happen? How is that change going to come?
Thank you so much. Are you able to hear me clearly? Am I audible? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Ajit. Thank you for your kind words. And Subramanya ji, so nice to see you. Thank you for your so kind words. Wonderful to be here together again, at least on a panel. And Ajit ji, you're right. In some senses, the uppermost thing in our minds was that we would write this wonderful stuff, and that's not our stuff. It was a widely consultative process. So it's the wisdom, the gist of the wisdom of, I would say, literally thousands of people, all stakeholders, not just education people, but industry, politicians, administrators. But at the core of it, always uppermost in our minds was, will it get implemented? Because as we were fond of saying to ourselves that, you look at, so if you go back to the 1968 policy, which came out of the Kothari Commission, it was a very wonderful policy. It was, very hard to find fault with it, really, in most ways. But the implementation, as it happened or didn't happen, really determined its fate and where India's education stands today. So here's the three things that I think, were underlying our thinking on the implementation. Three things. There were perhaps many considerations, but I'll just point out three. The first one was that some things would have to be done very quickly, and some things will have to be given a lot of time. I'll use an example. There is a certain momentum, like you said, there's a certain enthusiasm about this policy which cuts across politics, which cuts across different strata of society. Yeah. So this is a moment that one needs to grab to actually do some more difficult things, which are perhaps politically difficult, which are perhaps difficult because of the existing structures. At the same time, one has to recognize that some of the other things would actually take 10 years to complete. So this sort of doing sprint on some and doing the marathon on some of the other things was a very important aspect. I'll give you an example. Subramanya ji rightly pointed out, but he did not elaborate. In my understanding, the re-architecting of the regulatory architecture that the policy envisions is one of the fundamental things that will transform higher education in the country. Now, that is something that I think would be and should be done very quickly, right? On the other hand, the implication of that regulatory architecture being transformed, being such that all colleges today should become autonomous board of governors governed institutions, much like the IITs or the IIMs, that is going to take time. You cannot do it overnight. It will destroy the entire system. So this matter of the sprint with the marathon, I think, was an important one. Two, it is also quite clear to us that one cannot evade the issue of money. The policy envisions a clear and a distinct role for the private philanthropic sector in education. It encourages it. The regulatory architecture is to make sure that regulation is light, lightened on everybody, including the private sector. But nevertheless, there's a certain centrality to the public expenditure that would have to be done for this policy, not today, but over a period of time. And I think there's sort of a pragmatic understanding in there that we cannot expect that the government of India, the state governments, will have this money overnight. That is not going to happen. So the question was, how do you really scale up from the current 3 to 4% of GDP being spent on Indian education, the public expenditure, going up to 6%, but do not expect it. Do not design your policy such that it is demanding that money in the first 2 years. Design the policy such that that scale up can happen over a 10-year period, which is far more practical. Right? So I think that was the second important aspect. The third one, with which I'll end, and I'll take you through a little bit of history on this. I refer to the Kothari Commission, and Kothari Commission. Many of us, Ajitji, you who have been in education, would be very familiar by the crucial role that Mr. J.P. Nayak played as a member secretary of the Kothari Commission. He was a man that all of us look up to. 1968, the policy came up. 1978, Mr. Nayak wrote a book called Education, Commission and After. It's a book worth reading for all of us who are interested in this policy, because that is like a rumination of Mr. Nayak on, if he had this hindsight in 1968, what might he have done differently, right? So there are many lessons in that book, but the most important lesson which we have taken away, which is the third aspect of what I was going to talk about in implementation, is the importance of remaining true to the spirit, which is where I think Subramaniaji started, remaining true to the spirit while giving flexibility on many of the details, right? So how does one try and architect? And it's not perfect. I do not think that any one of us would expect that this is a perfect policy or it's designed in a perfect manner. I don't think one can expect that. But it's a best attempt that the government of India can make, such that the spirit of what is intended remains, even if over a 10-15-year period, some of the details start varying. So, Ajitji, with that, I'll end. And Subramaniaji, who was our partner in developing this, he gave too much credit to us. He was an equal partner. I think he would be able to say a lot more.
I will ask him, but I'll ask him a slightly different, and it's actually to both, and that's where I also bring Mr. Uday Shankarji. See, some of us did, and I keep reiterating it because I think it's important. We as Indians have got far too used to throwing stones at anything the government does. And that's something I dislike with a passion. So when I read this, I have to say I was super excited by it, and I still am. Right? I tried to do some rough and crude calculations of what it's going to cost. So my one question to Subramaniam Garu is, do we have a rough idea over the next 20 years it's going to, and will the 6% be able to meet it? My own gut feel, and I'll be very honest, is that I think we need an order of magnitude higher amount than 6%. Order of magnitude, not 5%, 10%, but a huge amount more. And therefore, coming back into, why is it that the policy does not give a bigger role to the private sector? Sorry, that's a somewhat convoluted question, but I think you know where I'm coming from.
I think Ajayji, if I can sort of just quickly come in on this implementation bit. See, in April 2019. Okay, so by the time the policy has not come, but we have the committee's report with us, so we exactly know what the committee is talking about. So there is a conclave. Well, I can say conclave, but it's actually a congregation of a lot of intellectuals, academicians. Anurag was supposed to come, but I think he gave us a slip. This was in the academy, Mussoorie Academy, where we sat together and exactly debated on what is the implementation plan for the NEP. In fact, there were 10 expert groups which worked on it. each group has come out with a very clear implementation strategy along with the budgetary estimates for implementing it. So it can't get more clearer than that. And after the report has been submitted, that's in the on 1st of June 2019. What we have done is that we have put together these implementation reports of these 10 groups, and this is called as EQUIP, Educational Quality Improvement Project. So EQUIP is a document which is available. I'm sure those of you who have interest in it, I'm sure such erudite persons can get a copy of it. It gives such clear-cut way forward. There are two parts to the implementation. One is there are non-financial aspects like regulatory changes, as Anurag is talking about, and then you have more structural changes, more infrastructural investments that are required, which are economical. So then you have a non-economical and economical interventions. As Anurag is saying, probably the first set of implementation measures would be non-financial, more of regulatory, and then the financial aspects. You have asked for a number. For higher education, we fixed a number of 1,50,000 crores. That is not 20 years. That's the next 5 years, and this is an additionality. Now the question arises as to where are we going to get these large numbers when the whole country is just struggling, going through a trauma of weakened fiscal situation. So we have created one organization called Higher Education Financing Agency, fully realizing that there are limitations to what the government can fund in terms of this, despite all this, fervor saying that 6% or 8%, whatever. We know that it's a reality that there is a limitation on what the government can do. So therefore, we created this organization called Higher Education Financing Agency. It has got a mandate to raise up to 100,000 crores, 1 lakh crores for investing in higher education. So, and then this is cleared. The agency is now functional. It has sanctioned projects worth about 30,000 crores. Of course, they are not related to this NEP. I'm only saying that there is a financial window that is opened, which can be used in order to implement this project. I think the structures are in place, policy is in place, and as long as all of you just keep pushing, I'm sure things will happen. That's what I will.
Great. So I'll certainly look up EQUIP, because I think I'm genuinely keen to feel comfortable. I'm also very heartened by the fact that this is an avenue through which the public sector can participate in this nation building exercise. And I'm assuming these are bonds, right? These must be some kind of a bond. And if those bonds are made reasonably attractive, I think that would be also, I think the other good thing about it is, instead of people directly investing in education and finding funny ways of taking money out, which unfortunately does happen in our country, what this will do is it will legitimize and make it a clean process of doing things. Which brings me now to Uday Shankar, that as industry, certainly I am a part of industry now, and I felt a little bit left out. I'll be very honest. I felt that here is the government trying to do far too many things. And what's your view? I mean, where do you think?
So thank you, Mr. Rangnekar. First and foremost, I must confess that I'm not qualified to talk on the merits and shortcomings of this policy. What my only especially when people like Mr. Reddy and Mr. Bayer are here, who played such a key role, and you yourself, Mr. Rangnekar, who've been an educationist. But I should say 2 or 3 things. First and foremost, I think I'm a beneficiary of the legacy Indian education system, and I'm a victim of the legacy Indian education system, both good and bad. So to that extent, I have a personal experience of where education has helped and where it has not helped. The second thing, as a member of the corporate sector and as a vice president of the Federation of Indian Chamber of Commerce, I have a view. Before I get to that, very quickly, I want to put a few things on record that, look, a policy, the fact that a policy has come is an absolutely welcome development. The last time a policy came, I was still an undergraduate student. And this policy has come after my daughter has already graduated. So a whole generation, if not two generations, have ambled their way around through the education system without a policy, or which is a sort of a, navigational tool. And in my view, a policy is nothing more than a broad navigational tool which encourages everybody, helps everybody to identify the direction in which go. So to that extent, it's amazing. It couldn't have come a day too soon. And it's totally amazing that what has been done. And by and large, I think there are a huge amounts of positives in this policy. Now to the question that you asked, sir, I think, there is a contradiction even within the government. And forgive me, Mr. Reddy, and all my co-panelists from the government. The government recognize that governments can do a lot of things. I'm not a big crazy free market advocate. Governments, I believe, have a role, and they can do a lot of things, and they do a lot of things. But there's a problem with the government itself. Government recognizes that it cannot do everything, and yet it takes upon itself the responsibility to do almost everything. And in the process, a large number of very, very fundamental stakeholders get left out. That builds suspicion, that sort of removes some of those potential catalysts, and that's exactly what has happened. I think there was a conversation around financing, and I'm sure agencies like the National Financing Agency would be very helpful. But we have to understand that in a country like India, with its income levels, with its challenges of investment, one thing we have to recognize that education sector may have suffered from everything, but one thing it has certainly suffered in the last several decades is lack of adequate investment. There is not one area of education which couldn't have done with more investment, whether it is infrastructure, whether it is teacher compensation, whether it is curriculum development, whether it is facilities for students, whether it is, everything. And this is from pre-primary all the way to the highest levels of education and research. Now, if we have such a huge resource issue, it's great that, private philanthropy has been encouraged. It's great that government has taken upon itself to step up in a very big way. But why would you not open the sector to clean, responsible corporate capital? Because that can only help. Corporate capital doesn't mean, as it is, in the absence of a institutional mechanism which makes it legitimate and productive for clean corporate capital to come in, all you're seeing is various distortions that have sneaked into this sector. By not fixing that, I think we have made this effectiveness of this policy suboptimal, and we have again exposed Indian education sector to all those distortions where people come in through under various garbs, and they try and make money in the education sector. It doesn't have to be like that. There is a role for the government, which we all recognize. There is a role for private philanthropy, and there should also be a role for corporate capital to come in. That, given the scale of the need in this country, and we are, as an executive of a company that routinely hires a lot of people across all sectors, we are facing a massive crisis. We need to recognize that. And this crisis is at all levels. So unless all walks of society come in and contribute to solve this crisis, the crisis is not going to go away. The policy is an amazingly positive development, but we need to find ways to resource it, and we need to create seamless alignment of incentives for the train, for the jet plane that it is meant to be to take off.
To respond, Subramaniam Garu?
I think largely fine with what he's saying. I think we see that the private sector has a huge role. And in fact, I think that's one bias which we suffered for a very long time. That private sector investments in education is a no-no, because we are completely against. But that's that is something which, if you have read the policy carefully, there is, it is actually, it is made very, very easy for the private sector to come in and then go and invest, and then also make some reasonable profit. It is not that, that non-profit entity still remains. But the point is that it doesn't mean that you should not make profit. You can make profit and reinvest and then let the institution or education system grow. So to that extent, I think there is, this policy has been a departure, and I think it brings private sector as a joint partner in development.
Okay. So you had earlier said that you had to leave a little early. How much more time do you have?
I think I would have to leave. I can see my friend, batchmate Chitra Ramchandran here. So I'll have to take her permission also, and yours, to leave a little early, and because there's some other commitment I have agreed, and I have to be there.
Sure, Subbu. But it was lovely to see you on screen today. We kind of missed each other yesterday. And what splendid work has been done by you and Anurag Garu and others. Doesn't matter. I'll tell you over phone what I conveyed and what I shared with the rest of the panelists. So go have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Professor, thank you very much. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your taking.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thank you. Just coming, because I think Uday also talked about the important thing of, and both Subramaniam Garu also mentioned this, vocational education, and also the middle. So what I'm going to do is the next maybe 5-6 minutes, I want to focus on that. By the way, I must also tell everyone who is listening in, please send your questions in. In about another 8 to 10 minutes, I'm going to hand this over to my colleague Sudhakar Rao, who will take the panel question from the listeners and bring them out. But till that, let me just stick to two very important things. One is vocational education. So isn't the lack of career opportunities the real problem in vocational education? I mean, unless we insist that an electrician or a plumber must be properly qualified and certified, and without that he or she will not be allowed. Just giving, because what is happening today is that the industry is not, asking or giving any preference, and therefore for anybody to expend a higher amount of capital to get something for which they don't get a competitive advantage doesn't make sense. So does the government have any, or do the policy makers, I know Anuragji, you cannot speak on behalf of the government, but as policy makers, was there this thing to take this to its logical end, and as my colleague Sudhakar Rao very nicely said, not solve demand side problem by doing something on the supply side?
Well, actually, the statement that you ended off with, it's perhaps a good summary that this is actually a supply side matter, right? The education policy really is a supply side matter. And I think we are very conscious of that the supply side can only do as much as it can, and the demand side is perhaps where a lot of the issues lie. Nevertheless, let me say it from the perspective of the policy. What are the kind of relevant issues which inform the construction of the policy? Relevant from the question that you talked about, right? So one was that how can the policy ensure that it is empowering institutions in a manner by which they have the kind of curricular flexibility and the capacity that they're very responsive to what is going on outside in the industry, right? One of the issues that one faces is that, I have an engineering college in the 80s. You come to the 90s, you come to the 2000s, curriculum and syllabus is not responsive. Leave alone responsive for tomorrow. It's not even responsive today. So this matter, and, as industry people, we may not give it the importance it deserves, but from an education institution perspective, that really is the heart of the matter. That do you have the curricular capacity and the curricular autonomy to be able to respond what's going on and what might happen. So that is one. Second, which I think is very critical, is that the policy deliberately demolishes the hierarchy between what is called academic education and what is called vocational education. All of us have, or most of us have been through the Indian education system. It's actually when you cannot get the right subjects, right in quote subjects, physics, chemistry, math, commerce, then you will go to, maybe history and something like that. If you can't get any of that, then you are perhaps going to go into vocational education. Now, what the policy does is right from class 6th, actually, class 6th, not just higher education, it integrates vocational education, I think, in a very thoughtful manner. I'll give you a specific illustration. What it does is 6th, 7th, 8th, it actually develops or attempts a curriculum which would develop what can be called the basic skills and capacities in vocations. It's not developing vocational capacity in itself, but whatever are the basic skills. And every child has to go through that, 6th, 7th, 8th. So it's developing, in some senses, the basic skills and capacities, and it's developing a value for work. By the time you get to 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, it actually integrates vocational education fully. What I mean by that is, no child, whichever school, you're in Hyderabad, whether you're going to the Hyderabad public school or you're going to a government institution, you'll have to do vocational education. You'll have to do vocational education. And lastly, and with that I'll stop, even at the undergrad level, when it talks about transformation of the undergraduate education, there also it's attempting to integrate vocational education. And it offers the flexibility in higher education, what it calls multiple entries and multiple exits, that you can do 1 year of higher education and graduate with a certificate, which then qualifies you for certain things. You can do 2 years of undergrad and then graduate with a diploma, and that qualifies you for certain things, then 3 years and 4 years, right? And that, I think, is also an important aspect.
I don't, that's why I say supply side, I think you're fixed up. I have no problem at all. I think, the real caste system, if I may use that harsh word, in India, in education, is based on the earning power of that discipline. If you do an MBA, you get so many lakhs. If you do engineering, you get so many lakhs. If poor you do history. And if you can't get into civil service, well, tough luck, right? So unless we fix that part of it, and unless somebody who does vocational education has a decent potential to get a good living, we are not going to solve. But I'll park it there. I want to come back to Uday Shankar. What the policy envisages is 50% gross enrollment ratio in higher education, which roughly at today's thing talks of 12 million graduates each year. My understanding is today we take about anywhere between 1 and 2 million. So in the next 10 years, 15 years, there's going to be a flood of graduates. Is that what the industry is looking for?
Well, that's a great question, Mr. Rangnekar. And I think that's the heart of the problem. And as you've said, and as everybody agrees, perhaps, that the policy is great for the supply side. But we all know that it's bad economics when you are only looking at one side, either supply or demand side. And without stimulating demand, and if you keep creating more supply, two things will happen. In the first phase, there would be a glut, and with the glut, there would be disincentives to keep providing high quality supply, so that the quality of the supply will keep going down. And that is exactly what has happened today. Even today, there may not be enough enrollment, but there are a lot of graduates and postgraduates and postgraduates who are coming out of campuses. And I can tell you, I represent a sector which is media and entertainment, where actually the best talent comes from liberal arts, humanities, and creative arts. Literature, humanities, history is a much maligned subject in this group. I can see that. I've studied history for many years, and I haven't done too badly. So, but it comes from this. However, the high quality graduates when we start hiring people in functions, whether to, which have only to do with articulation, writing, ability to appreciate literature, basic stuff like that, we are struggling, and our struggle is not getting better, it's getting worse increasingly. 20 years ago, when I started hiring, or 25 years ago, when I first got into capacity to hire talent, I could get a lot more talent at affordable rates than I could get today, even though our ability to pay is a great deal more. I'll give you a simple example. Earlier, as we were discussing a while ago, everyone who didn't study medicine, engineering, and to some extent subjects like maths and physics was, no matter how bright you were, and maybe it was either an accident or a kink of personality that guided you towards liberal arts and humanities and literature. However, you were gloriously unemployable. There were only two careers that were left for you. Either you became a civil servant if you were lucky enough, or you went into teaching. Their absorption capacity for both these streams was very low. So, in areas like journalism, media, creative writing, all of those, there were a lot of well-educated people from high-quality campuses who were available. Today, the quality of the output has gone down there, and what Mr. Rangnekar was saying, that there is no incentive for people to for high-quality people to go and study anything, unless you go into a job where people can get employed. We have to address one fundamental thing in our heads, no matter how unpleasant it might be, but we have to confront that fundamentally parents and students do not want to study to become knowledgeable. They study, and parents invest in their education because they want to give them a secure future. And the security of the future doesn't come from education. It comes from education is just a tool for them to get a good job, improve their earning capacity. If we are not doing anything to improve the earning capacity, we have a big problem. And that supply side approach will not fix it. And I think there's a real issue here. You use the metaphor of caste system. There is a caste system here. There is academics and there is vocation. That we need to fix. There is no, this duality must go away. All education must lead or must give people an opportunity to work. And the problem is we just don't have enough jobs. So the fundamental requirement is for people to be self-enabled. What we call entrepreneurship. It's not a great expression in my mind. It's very honorable. However, the underlying meaning is risk, which makes every parent very averse to it. If a child goes and says, "I want to be an entrepreneur," the parents say, "Oh my God, he's going to, he's setting himself up or herself up for a huge risk." But we need to make sure that people are self-employable. And no matter what we are teaching them, whether it is history or economics or engineering, we have to have a very, very clear focus on people's ability to create something worthwhile for themselves, which allows them to succeed and which allows them to earn a living. If one thing needs to, we need to pivot on something, this is the pivot around which I would think we should all work. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to absorb them.
Thank you. I actually have a little bit more sympathy for Anurag and for what they're doing. I think this is exactly the problem to some extent they're feeling, but I see two very fascinating things. One, this is a great opportunity for us as industry to now collaborate with the government, say, how do we together ramp up the demand side? And I think that is going to be extremely important. And I think it has to be done because the other thing that the policy does envisage, and I thought has done a great job on, is to at least think and talk about entrepreneurship and things. And this is where Anurag, and I'm sorry, I'm going to hand over to Sudhakar now, so I wish I could give you a little bit more time maybe. I think the one area where I find this policy has not at all included is parents of young children. So in some ways, what you have done is, think of somebody who's been hungry for years and not even getting 2 meals a day. And all of a sudden, you're taking them to a swanky 5-star hotel and giving them the world's everything menu. Their parents don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to deal with it. And this is what I meant, that the real lever of change is going to be changing the hearts and minds of parents. and making these people counselors and things like that. The role of teachers is going to change from being teachers to counselors, and somehow that doesn't come out as well. I'm sure it was discussed and I'm sure it was there, but it doesn't come out as well as it should. I'm sorry. If you want to say something for 1 minute desperately, I'll definitely allow you. Otherwise, can I ask Sudhakar to? So, choice is yours, Anurag. You want to say
I,
something?
I am never desperate, but I think I think you need to. It is really focused on how parents will get involved. It is, uh, and you expressed your tiredness with reading the 484 pages. But it's a good idea to, wherever there is a lacuna that you see in the 66 pages, which is the policy, to refer back to the 484 pages, because that is explanatory. So if there's, let's say, the parent issue, it might be very useful to take the 66 pages and go back to the 484, because it will talk about the parents, and parents are very integral. And not just at later level in school, but in fact, in the age group of 0 to 3, how do you really involve parents? How do you enable parents to give the most disadvantaged children the kind of environment that really will enable their development? Because that's the most crucial part of the child's development. Right? So,
So thank you. No, because this is something I didn't know that was the fact. I thought that had been edited and rest of it has been cut out. So I think
no,
I would very strongly urge you to please publicize this, that a whole lot of this is backup is still valid, because that was a
absolutely.
draft, and the way we looked at this, a whole lot of things have been cut out. So
No.
thank you, Sudhakar. If you're there, I'm going to hand over to you. My apologies for running over time, but I thought this was very useful and interesting for me to learn at least. So over to you, Sudhakar. Sudhakar, are you there?
Good evening to the distinguished panelists. I'm extremely happy to be here today, and I also give my special greetings to the specially included guests in the WebEx and all the thousands of attendees on YouTube. Uh, there are too many questions actually. Let me try and handle a few in the interest of time. The first question is from Professor J. Mahendra Reddy Garu, is the Vice Chancellor for ICFI Foundation for Higher Education. He observes that it is neither the lack of interdisciplinary approach nor the silo approach that has led to the deterioration of quality in higher education. It is basically because of lack of quality faculty, infrastructure, funding, and examination system, which are the main causes. So why insist on multidisciplinary universities? That is the question, sir. Anyone can take in the panel. Anurag, sir?
I'm guessing I'll have to respond.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So, I think it'd be useful to unthread that question. It's useful to unthread that question. As you go through the policy, you would realize that it is quite explicit in the commitment and the design that the basic matters that are talked about, which the gentleman has referred to, they are focused on. There's no question that without adequate infrastructure, without the adequate number of teachers, without empowerment of teachers and institutions, good quality education can't happen. So that's there. It's not as though that's not paid adequate attention to. It is paid adequate attention to. That's one. The matter of multidisciplinarity is something altogether different, which is, if you now think, well, if we got the basics, what are the other things that we need to focus on? And, I just heard Uday made a comment about history. And I think, the policy, what it does is it pays due importance to the fact that our education over the past 40, 50 years has become extraordinarily siloized. If I'm an engineer, I have no clue about history. In fact, I can't even write well, right? And if I'm a historian, I just run away from mathematics. Now, that's the reality that all of us have. And that's not the world we are facing. Any of you, most of you are in business. You're actually requiring this integration of the ability to communicate well, to think critically, right? To do math. All of that is required together. You cannot have the kind of siloization that our higher education or school education encourages, because that's not what is required out there. And therefore, the envisioned transformation of undergraduate education towards a multidisciplinary education is really to address that those fundamental capacities that are required of all human beings today, of all citizens actually. How does one develop that? So these are two different aspects. They are in some ways interrelated, but that's why both of them are equally important.
Thank you, sir. There's another question from Mr. Shekhar Agarwal. Can we promote better health in the society, save a lot of wastage on financial resources by providing 1 hour of theory and practice classes right from KG to PG? With an observation that many subjects that we learn in the school are generally not useful in our life. What is useful, we usually don't learn in the schools. That's basically health he's talking about. Yes, sir.
So shall I take that? Okay.
I think only you can handle. You've been a part. The truth is you are part of the committee, and therefore you have a much better
Correct.
insight.
And if Subramania ji was here, he could have done it, but I'll take it. Yes. So let me emphasize one part of the question which I thought was very important. That matter is not just to do with health, but other things as well. That are we learning things in school? Are we learning things in school and later in college, which are really relevant and directly relatable to life outside? Actually, the truth is that all knowledge, or almost all knowledge, is relatable to life outside. The question is, how do we teach and how do we learn that? And the siloization that I was referring to earlier, siloization of disciplines of subjects, that siloization is also there within disciplines of saying this is theory and that is practice. Actually, that's not true. I mean, each discipline is integrated. Let's take history again. History, is there theory and is there practice? When I say practice relatable to outside world, it's actually together, right? And therefore, what the policy does is it not 1 hour of theory and 1 hour of practice. It attempts to re-architect the very principle of how teaching learning should happen, where everything one is learning, everything, not just health, everything one is learning is actually relatable to your life, to the life around you, and to larger society. And that it tries to do, or will do, as the National Curricular Framework 2021 comes up, is for all disciplines, not only health. And just one line on health. Yes, indeed, recognizing that health is so critical, it does focus on health quite significantly. And when I say it focuses on health quite significantly, it's not just the teaching of health, it's the practices. It's, in fact, the policy in the school level takes this very, very bold decision that not only should we provide high quality midday meals, and it talks about improving the quality of midday meals, but also provide breakfast. Those of you who have seen government schools would be familiar that very often kids who go to government schools, their first meal of the day is the lunch, the midday meal. And when they're hungry through the morning, their ability to focus and learn is lost.
Thank you, sir. There are too many questions on implementation. I'm only trying to summarize that any amount of response on implementation is not sufficient. So there are a variety of questions about implementation. I'm sure a little bit of it was answered in the initial discussion. I'll leave that out. But there's one specific question I have. This is from Mr. Harish Ramachandra Rao. It is specific to the point that the study of pure sciences like physics, chemistry, and maths is not attracting adequate number of talented students because these are not viewed as, say, vocational. How is the policy going to address this?
Yeah, I think this is a central issue, which is, and I will respond to that question both at the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th level and the undergrad level. And essentially, it sort of ties back to the issue of multidisciplinary education that was being talked about. And I'll use the example of 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, where it becomes much clearer, right? Which is that through 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, the curriculum will be reframed such that every child, every student would have to take subjects from, let's call them buckets. So every student would have to take some from the physical sciences, biological sciences, from humanities, from vocational education. That is going to ensure that all students are getting some rigorous grounding in the physical sciences as well as the vocational side. Now you extend that up to undergraduate. When you go to undergraduate, the same concept applies, which is that whether you're doing medicine or whether you're doing engineering or whether you're doing commerce or economics, given the re-envisioning of the curricular structures to be broad-based, liberal education-based, you would actually end up doing some physical sciences, some mathematics, some humanities, and some social sciences. And importantly, it's not just the curricular structure. As I mentioned earlier, it's also how those subjects and disciplines will be relatable to your life and to the world outside. This is not going to be about mugging up stuff, going out there and writing some tests which are essentially assessing your rote memorization. But it really is going to be about your understanding and conceptual application of what you've learned. So there are multiple sort of dimensions which encourage people to learn both the physical sciences, humanities, and the social sciences.
Sudhakar,
That's been a great response.
Sudhakar,
Yeah.
still on? Yeah, time is running out. Sudhakar.
Thank
know
you.
it will.
I think I must thank Anurag. He's been a real great sport and he's done a phenomenal job of answering. And thank you very much, Uday Shankar, for putting the industry perspective so clearly and so concisely. I will privately convey my really deep appreciation to Subramaniam Garu for being so open and honest about things. Thank you very much. And I'll now hand over to TM. Do you take over?
Yeah, Murli Krishna Reddy. Yeah, we'll take over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geet, and thank you all the panelists. I think you made our day. At a very short notice, we organized this. But I think the superstar is going to come now. Jagdish Sheth is already here, I think, in the room. And we have a lot of interesting questions to ask him as we proceed. So first, I'm going to ask Murli Krishna Reddy, our co-chair, to welcome. Murli Krishna Reddy garu.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes, good evening, everybody. On behalf of FICCI Telangana, I extend a warm welcome to all the guest speakers, esteemed speakers for this evening. First of all, I would like to welcome and introduce Professor Jagdish Sheth. He's the professor of business at Emory University, Atlanta, USA, a great educationist and well known all over the world as an expert in consumer behavior and other aspects of education. And we are very lucky to have him here this evening to talk about his experiences from an American perspective and throw light on our National Education Policy 2020. He's also Padma Bhushan awardee for 2020. That's a great tribute to his contribution to the field of education and business ideas. I also extend a warm welcome to Srimati Chitra Ramchandran, Special Chief Secretary in charge of Education, Government of Telangana. She's playing such a crucial role in shaping up education for our state, and they are going to implement the NEP. And I also take this opportunity to welcome our Industry and IT Secretary, Principal Secretary, Sri Jayesh Ranjan, IAS, to this webinar. Finally, I extend a warm welcome to Mr. Naveen Mittal, IAS, to this webinar. He's the Commissioner for Collegiate Education and also Technical Education. Thank you. Warm welcome to all the participants in this webinar. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
You're on mute.
You hear me now? All right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dilip. I want to just say that the first part of the session was a very exciting session. We had 3 panelists, but the second half is going to be even more interesting. Not because I'm the moderator, but we're going to make it more exciting in this section. Primarily, I think what we need to focus on, as we're going to focus on in this session, is to basically look at the US-Indian context. So I'm going to set the context very briefly. So far, in the first half of the session, we have not talked about numbers. I am known for sharing some numbers. The first part is about what we asked FICCI Senior Vice President about private sector. I don't think we are recognizing how deep and how big is the role of private sector right now in school education. 40% of our students, 100 million students out of 250 million, are in private education. Now, what does it mean? It means the government is not paying for their education, the parents are paying, right? Now, on top of this, students are migrating in larger numbers from government schools to private schools once they cross class 8. So the ratio of between private and government switches in favor of private sector schools as soon as you cross class 8 and reaches 60% to 70% of the total students enrolled are in private schools after class 11 and 12. Now, this is the power on the importance of private sector right now. Now, look at the other side. Majority of 70% of the students parents spend 30 to 40% of take-home money on education. In fact, in many Indian families, education is one of the largest budgets, despite the government giving free education. Now, that speaks a lot about why would I spend my hard-earned money if I can send them to government school? Why am I going taking them to private school? The parents are paying on an average anywhere between 70,000 rupees per year, and it's a lower end I'm talking about if you take the average. But government schools are free. Now, this is a very, very important question. The amount of money parents are funding, if you look at the total budget which you spend, government which talks about 3% of GDP is about 6 lakh crores, but parents spend 4 lakh crores. Now, this is what Ajit mentioned, and I want this to be one of the discussions we'll be taking it later on about how important education is to parents in India. They put their life, they put their future on the children. They spend most of their disposable income on education. And there we have a challenge because the government schools are still not struggling to get up to the mark. The second part is about the quality. Everybody asks, why is Indian quality of education poor? Now I'm going to go to central issue. Central issue is how much do you spend on education per child? The government schools on an average spends about 20,000 rupees, all included, including government budget and also parent budget, about 20,000. Whereas the private schools today are anywhere between 60,000 and 70,000 per child. Now the big question is, okay, government gives infrastructure free, there are a lot of benefits the government schools get, but still it's 3 times more expensive. Now, if you are to spend 60,000 rupees per child on every child in India, we will end up spending about 15 lakh crores, 11% of GDP, from where we are on 3%. The last point is very, very important. When you compare to US, I'm going to talk about India versus US now. India spends 8% of what US spends per child, or 6% of what Switzerland spends per child on PPP basis. PPP means we adjust for purchase price parity. It is not a dollar exchange. After adjusting for purchase price parity, we spend 8% of the US child spend and 6% of the US child. Now, last, I want to highlight 2 more important points. Total amount of money US spends is 12 times our spend on 20% of our school enrollment. That means 1/5 of the population, 12 times the money. US, there's a lot of debate right now going on that US teachers are very poorly paid. Even as recently last week, I've read a lot of debate on teachers are poorly paid. But the fact is, teachers are paid anywhere between $40,000 a year to $55,000 a year. 40,000 as the entry point, and average is around 55,000. India, how much do we pay? We pay 1.7 or $1,700 per teacher per year at the entry level. And it goes all the way to $7,000 or $500K per year. This is seventh pay commission after the pay commission, and all, most of us believe government teachers are better paid than private school teachers. So our teachers are paid at 4% of the US teacher's salary, the entry level, or 13% of the average level of US teachers. So here is a summary. In India, we spend far less on education. We pay our teachers very poorly. How can we expect quality education? Now, as come to higher education is even more interesting, US versus India. US government spends only 30% on higher education, and the majority comes from self-funded or loans, etc. But the number of people enrolled is only half of India. So US spends only 36% of the total fund budget comes from the government. The rest of them are private or individuals or parents, right? But as in India, higher education is very, very low priced, and the challenges in terms of pricing we'll also discuss about later on. So how can we design higher education for quality in India? What can we learn from the US experience? So to answer these questions, and we have more specifically, we have raised about 9 questions for Professor Jagdish Seth. Professor Jagdish Seth, welcome. Tomorrow swagat hai. Tomorrow swagat hai Hyderabad se. And we are very delighted to have you. And we're going to ask him to speak on key insight from the US experience. Jagdish Seth knows India very well. He's a big Indophile, and he also has a lots and lots of close relationship with Mr. Narendra Modi, and I'm sure many of his ideas have been given to him, and Mr. Modi is implementing some of them. So we are privileged to have you, sir, in this today. I am going to invite you to speak, make an opening statement, and then as we speak, the 9 areas we have identified, and we would like you to take it as you like. The idea is not to make it a question answer format, but the idea is to locate or discussions around these 9 points which we discussed. We have about 30 minutes starting now. And then I will be little rude to 3 minutes before the 30 minutes. I'll politely tell you 3 minutes left. Okay, over to you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Muralidharan. Thank you for inviting me. This is a very exciting session, and especially the part that you asked me to do is even more important or interesting for me, namely the US experience in terms of education and higher education, and how that experience we can learn the lessons from. So here are the couple of observations. First of all, higher education is funded very differently in America than education. I'll make a point on that one based upon your comments. The local, the high school up to high school education is all funded by personal property tax. Since ownership is very high in America, more than 65–70% of the households own their home, like we pay mortgage, there's a property tax. That actually funds, government does not fund as much. Taxpayers give money, affluent neighborhoods will pay higher taxes, poor neighborhoods will pay less taxes, and they're allocated proportionately, sometimes some cross subsidy. So public schools are well funded in places where education is the state government or local city government, for example, and therefore they tend to invest a lot more. So they allow tax increases on the property tax. Not income tax, this is more like a sales tax essentially. And therefore, as the neighborhoods age, public schools there, the older senior citizens don't want to pay their property tax. It's almost 40% of my total property tax will go toward funding education of public schools. Some of them therefore move out from the neighborhood, or in cities where there is not strong public education, especially in the downtown area or inner city, then they go to private schools. So private school is sort of the secondary choice, not the primary choice. And in addition to private schools, we have quite a few areas. The first one, of course, is faith-based schools, we have quite a few schools which are anchored to a given faith, Christianity mostly, and then they fund it through congregation. Congregation gets collections, they subsidize the education, but more importantly, they give them the values and the philosophy of what the faith tells them all about, and bond with the next generation of faith goers, people who will ultimately marry, have children, so continuity of families. That's very important. The other one is that at the sort of primary and secondary school, America has been very experimental. It has allowed all experiments, more like a market process. So we have a charter schools meant for lower socioeconomic classes. And that's where a teacher often is given the authority to become the principal. He has his own advisory board, or she has an advisory board. And then charter schools have grown state by state enormously. Georgia, where I live, for example, we might have maybe 60 to 70 charter schools, each school producing 200, 300 children. Then they can do primary, secondary, etc. Then in addition to that, we allow self-studying, studying at home. Parents say, I will educate my child because I don't want my child to be influenced by the environment, not just the education. So we have allowed all experiments. Just keep that in the back of your mind. And so I just want to mention that my focus will be less on primary and secondary education and more on higher education. Higher education is paid not by the government.
Yeah.
Very clear demarcation.
Yeah.
And
Thank
that goes back to historical reason. When after Lincoln became the president, did the abolition of slavery, but he also transitioned the economy from being agricultural driven primarily to more and more industrialization, which means literacy became very important. There was no literacy. Around Lincoln time, less than 25% of the people were literate. They did not know how to read and write. I'm told in the military or the army, it was less than 11%. Because in agricultural age, you don't need literacy. So it became mandatory 12 years of high school. Government mandated that, paid by the property taxes and so on. And we trained people into 3 hours of learning, reading, writing, and arithmetic, which I'll talk later on, which is changing dramatically. But that's how it began. The terminal degree in America till 2 generations ago was high school only. Less than 11, 12% ever went to college because affordability became a very key point. Accessibility became a very key point for the average American citizen. So therefore, we have a graduation in May, June, and right after that, the girl who is about 17, 18 will get married to a boy. Last 3 years of high school, they went study, the two families knew each other, which is why in America, mobility was very low. If you graduated from a high school in a small town, you lived in the same town either as a technician or as a bank manager, whatever the job opportunities were, because only 11% went to college. Today, that number of going to college, gross enrollment ratio, as you might call it in India, has gone up to 60%. Because you are in the community, born, brought up, and living, you have an umbilical cord. And that umbilical cord breaks down once the child goes away to study some other place in higher education, paid out of money. Now, where does that money come from? A lot of the money comes where if you're a girl, the parents usually like to undergraduate program, not graduate. If you're a boy, then you're asked to work outside in restaurant or wherever it is, which is very important because in the previous panel, one key point was made. A young child in America is trained to respect labor. In other words, you have to be a busboy in a restaurant, which means collecting all the dirty plates. You have to be a server, etc. You have to be at a petrol station and pump the gas. All of the handyman's work they have to do to earn money to support themselves, partly, if not fully. We opened up student loans, which has now grown to $1.5 trillion. One of the largest debt on the family or the individual is that, so that's a big one. That's one funding that's very important to understand. The second thing is, surprisingly, most universities in America actually have well endowments, large endowment. The total endowment for 2019 now has exceeded $500 billion. $500 billion generates about roughly, I would say, $25 billion for spending money, but 5% roughly of the endowment you are allowed to spend. Universities have a great advantage in America, whether it's a private or a public, because they are all corporations, first of all. They're not civil societies. Some of the faith-based might be, and all corporations are tax exempt. So they pay no income tax, which is a big benefit. But they cannot take the dividends out at the same time, which means they have to distribute surplus, however they generate from the fees or endowments, etc., back into the enterprise somehow, either expand the programs or give more fellowships or scholarships, etc. That is a very important distinction to keep in mind, whether you are a state university or a private university. The difference between state and private university is very simple. Private universities do not get funding from the government in a state, given state. So I will just contrast. Georgia Tech is a top university. Georgia Tech will get a budget from the government, state of Georgia, part of the government, maybe up to about 30% of the total budget of the Georgia Tech as an institution, or Michigan, University of Texas, Austin, UC Berkeley is the same model. The money they collect from centers, endowments, grants money from research. So our endowment is a big piece of funding the students through fellowships, scholarships. Research grant money is a very large one. Universities probably get as much as $15 to $20 billion annually for research contracts, where government funds you for generating new knowledge quite often. And the knowledge becomes surprisingly in the public domain. Because it is funded by the government, intellectual rights belong to the institution and to the government. And hence it becomes a public good as opposed to a private research laboratory at a corporation, for example, like the Bell Labs, for example, or General Motors Tech, for example. Just keep that in the back of your mind. You have as good a world-class state universities as the private universities. Berkeley and Stanford are parallel. UCLA, which is a state university in Southern California, is as good as USC, for example. It just goes on. So you have a very interesting mix there. Well, I wanted to mention last point before we open up for your questions, and that is very important. We have in America, about last year in 2018, 1.1 million foreign students who came to study, and the total GDP contribution is about $455 billion. India, the situation is opposite. India actually sent out students. Totally is about the same all over the world. And in India, unfortunately, that's a big drain. My view is that it's about $30 billion of balance of payment problem, because our students go abroad, study even at $10,000 per, most of them come to America or United Kingdom, then they go to other countries in Europe or Asia. If you take average cost of living alone, $10,000, they go to advanced countries. And if you take the numbers that we have, actually, it turns out to be, by the way, right now, about 4 million Indian students are studying abroad. 4 million. The latest statistics are 3 million in 2016. It is growing at 22% in India. And my estimate is about 4 million, out of which as many as about 1 million maybe in UK, million maybe in America. It's a big drain on the foreign exchange. So this document is as valuable strategically, financially, as it is from a policy viewpoint. What can we do to keep students over there? That says if they cannot go abroad, can we bring the universities into India, for example, and where they should be located? Hence all the regulation changes, etc. So that's one more area I wanted to mention. To American government, foreign students is very valuable asset in terms of earning exchange, which is very key part, and they want to attract. Largest number of foreign students for colleges are from China. The latest numbers from China is about 370,000. India is about 200,000. South Korea, for a small country, is very large, 52,000. Saudi Arabia, 37,000, and Canada, 26,000, which is interesting. So I will stop here to say, I think we can learn quite a lot from US, what we can do in India. Parallels are there, opportunities are there. So I will stop here for any questions you have.
Yeah. Thank you. We have a lot of questions, of course. I think the purpose of this conversation is to understand what we can learn. We are in a very critical point. NEP 2020 lays out a roadmap for the next 25, 30 years. So whatever choices we are going to make have to be made now, because that will have an impact going forward. So my first question is, in US, there are 2 points you mentioned: education, or in education as an industry, or education as a service provider is not a bad word, right? Private education is not a bad
Correct.
word. Number one. The second one,
No.
very important. There's a lot of, everybody coexists. There's a private university, there are public universities, there are community colleges, they coexist. Now, in India, we are still seen as adversarial position between private and public universities. So what do you think we can learn from the US experience on how to coexist these three systems of community colleges equivalent? They're also going to come up in India, public universities and private universities. How do we get a coexisting model? Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Yes, you are so right that multiple formats and institutions are there in the higher education. They not only coexist, but they have an interconnection. For example, many places you will have a 2-year college or a 4-year liberal college designed to go to major university, which is research oriented. In the medical field, that will be very common. So you study pre-medical program at one institution, and then you go to medical school at some other institution. Very common in law. You study law courses meant not law degree, because we don't have undergraduate law, it's JD and above, but there are law schools which only offer graduate education, but there are institutions which are linked in some fashion, they go. In the state university system, it's very simple. Most of the high school graduates will decide whether they want to go to a vocational technical college, first 2 years. They get an associate certificate primarily because they want to be people with doing things with hands primarily. Or those who want to go to 4-year liberal arts college quite often, ultimately, and the state provides the guidance. Some of the states give incentives. I tell you, this is very fascinating, comes from the taxpayer dollars. California, to create the interest in people coming and locating there way back when it was wild, wild west essentially, actually has all community colleges free education. Any citizen of California, resident of California, can go to any community college. Then they created a 4-year college system called California State University with 29, 30 campuses, one of the largest in the country. That feeds into University of California system, which will be like Berkeley, UCLA, UC Riverside, UC Irvine, UC San Diego. There are about, 14, 15. Each state has that system. So the state is actively engaged in creating interconnections. They also have a common board of regents. Governing mechanism is not by each institution, but at a state level, because states funds quite a lot. So you have a board of regents many places. At one time it used to be elected, but now it is more appointed by the governor, who is like a chief minister. So there's a governance mechanism put on all the state colleges, and there's a succession planning. Let me tell you one very unique thing happening now, which I think we might learn. They have identified in the state university systems with 29, 30 campuses in a given state, let's say, or California has about more than that. Here is what they do. They find that some people love administration. So they would like start as a department head, then the dean, then the provost, then the chancellor, president, right? What they do is they rotate them across institutions. In other words, you do your, the deaning in one place within the state system. You are groomed and go to become the vice chancellor at some other university, etc. So there's a connectivity done by leadership rotation, just like in a corporation, where you work for one division, then you work for another division, one function or the other function. Ultimately, you rise to the top level. which will be the system-wide governance mechanism. So there's a lot of commonality in governance that comes through that process. We did have a clear demarcation. Top private universities, 25, Harvard, MIT, Carnegie Mellon, Wharton, or Pennsylvania, Northwestern, Emory, we are a part of that group. Usually we tend to recruit faculty from each other because belief is that the faculty has a much stronger research experience. They've got more research contracts, better publications. So increase the scholarship we used to, but today that boundaries are blurring now, both in the administrative side as well as the faculty from the great state universities like Berkeley, for example, or Michigan. Private universities are now not having this view that we are superior. We can recruit some selected candidates from those, and the private university candidates, their preference would be to go to another private university, but they even end up into state universities. So there's a connection outside of the classroom. Let me ask the last connection. We do allow into the consortium of universities across states or within the state where you can exchange your credit. For example, one program at Georgia Tech and Emory is very important to understand. Georgia Tech is an engineering college like MIT, best in many, many disciplines, number one. We are very good in medical sciences. So they have created a 5-year bioengineering program, 5 years, not 4 years. You study at Georgia Tech, but then to understand biology and do the clinical trials, you come to Emory, for example. 2 years, I think, at Emory. It is ranked already #1 in the nation. There's nothing like it. Collaboration between two universities in the same cities is more common, even though they compete at the same time. MIT and Harvard collaboration has led to this edX platform, which is an online platform, which has become so large. They invested money, both of them together. You needed the engineering capability, but you also needed the liberal arts courses, social science courses. So it goes on. So we have a lot more connection. There's a whole body also. And I think this is very important. There are certain national bodies that represent these colleges and schools. And those bodies like ACE, American Council of Education, Colleges of Education, represents all higher education commonly. One more thing that we can learn here is that there is obviously a journal for practitioners or leaders, Chronicle of Higher Education, which gives you all the research and the information. Very important magazine or a journal primarily. I think it's weekly, and you get all the information about who is moving where. It keeps you updated. So you don't remain in your silo. They try very hard to remove as many silos without having the bureaucracy,
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Since the time is very short, I'm going to give you one last question, which is actually very direct and not in the list. I'm not going with the list now. I think we can take off the this thing, Akhilesh.
Sure.
So this question is very direct. You said in US, a lot of foreign students come to US, and it's a great economic dividend you get out of that, right? For that, you created a system.
Yes.
Now, my question to you is that why can't India do that for this region? For example, Asia is the fastest economic growth. India has got a lot of universities which are probably may not be suitable for US student to come here, but people from the region can come. But I didn't see in the education policy anywhere a reference to how to make education India as a center for foreign students to come and study here. So, what is it possible to do? What should India do to attract foreign students and make it a hub for the region at least? What do you say?
No question, it can be done. First of all, the main reason to do it right would be to have standards of education in higher education level to the world standards, not Indian standards or Indian regulation. You have to go above and beyond if possible. So primarily you have to go for accreditation. In medical field, that's exactly how it happens. Which are you accredited for MBBS, for example, versus MD in America? And Manipal education system already has become a global destination, especially of Indian diaspora, which is easy to go access them. Quite a few used to come from Africa at one time. Nowadays, they're coming from Malaysia. In fact, it has led to Manipali going to Malaysia building a campus, because in medical school you have to have the the whole what you call the practice side, clinical side, and apparently they denied very much the very much the the money going out, right? It used to come only of Indian origin under Mahathir first government. They decided that it will open up for Bhumiputras, which are the local people, also Chinese, Malay. So today, intake may go from 20 students per year to more than 100 per year over a 5-year program. First 2 years, they come to Manipal in Manipal city, Manipal Medical School, Manipal University. And then 3 years, Manipal faculty goes to Malaysia in Malacca. So I think it's very possible. We have quite a few hubs, but it has to be more education meant for the future. And this is very important point. Education was primarily for enlightenment at one time. You wanted to send your children so that they get more enlightened about the world, become more progressive, more liberal, basically broaden their horizon. Today, especially in the late 60s onwards in America, education became livelihood. Very important.
Very
It was
important.
a livelihood phenomenon which says I will go after those programs which generate jobs immediately for me. So right now, anything in software, I mean, we get, I think, Georgia Tech, my neighbors, 80 students a year from India. Think about that, 80 per India, 2-year program. There are about 160 students just in one program called computer science. And every one of those students has a job lined up at the end of 2 years.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
can Georgia Tech come? So can Georgia Tech come to Hyderabad?
Yeah.
Given the visa situation, given the COVID phenomenon. So we think that now, with the tight geopolitical alignment between America and India, for whatever reason it's happening, I think it's more long term. There will be now clear interest by American colleges and universities to have a presence in India, and the new national education policy will allow them to do that thing. The traditional bureaucracy of being part of the UGC system, University Grants Commission, or AITC, whatever we have, I think they'll be doing something on their own. They will raise the standard. So I'm a very strong advocate. What can we do both as an industry, as well as a government, as well as universities of higher education, to invite them to India with welcome arms, because they will raise standards as we have done in automobiles when the foreign car makers came. So we don't have just, for example, a Fiat or an Ambassador car. Today, car choices are mind-boggling. Just as we have done in appliances, Samsung and LG has raised standards of how to make good appliances. This is good for the nation, because you are creating a talent that goes for the future standards, very much technology oriented, artificial intelligence, all of that comes about in possibility if they come to India. And here are the statistics quickly to tell you, and I'm sorry we are running out of time. For example, the largest number of foreign students coming to America to study is at New York University, NYU. Last year, 19,600 students came. USC is a second one in California. It is about 16,000 students. Northeastern University in Boston, about 16,000 students. University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, major engineering school, 14,000 students every year, by the way, and Arizona State. These big institutions with large enrollments will be the ones who will be very interested to have a campus in India.
Okay.
As they have campuses in Dubai, Bahrain, for example, or Doha, which is the capital of Qatar, and they're having presence in Singapore or in Hong Kong. So by programs, they will come, and I think it's a question of just making the regulation easy for them to come, even though they can compete with local colleges, but it'll raise everybody's standards in the process.
Thank you, Professor Jagdish Sheth. Has been very enlightening for me, especially for most of us in the audience. Only one concluding remark I can make is that the biggest challenge for India in higher education is the pricing. How much can we afford? An Indian family can afford. And fortunately, many of the Indian faculty are also in the US. Indian students are also in the US. maybe bring both of them and marry both of them to build quality infrastructure in India with Indian students and Indian faculty who's US studied and come here. Maybe we can build a model which is more affordable in Indian context. I think that's where I would leave it and invite uh, uh, Mrs. Chitra Ramchandran. She's been our special chief secretary for education. Chitra Garu, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, thank you. I have a very direct question for you. You heard NEP issues on one side. You heard about the American side. We in Telangana have a vested interest. We want to be the best state in attracting high quality. We want to be the hub for education in India. I mean, I'm stating my personal objective. We have all the advantages. We're centrally located. We have good universities. We have a lot of quality students in IITs, etc. So how does one take advantage? How the Telangana state can take advantage of the NEP and the opportunity to bring foreign universities into India? How do we collaborate? So it's an open topic for you. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you so much for Ajit Garu, Sudhakar Garu, yourself. What Professor Jagdish said just spoke about really was mind-boggling, in the sense that one thought, when would this happen in India, particularly in Telangana? But then he made one very, very relevant point, which I think is extremely important for every private investor in India who invests in education to understand. He said surplus that's generated is plowed back into the institution. Now, I'd like to ask the private investors, are we doing that? Any private investor who invests in a school or a college in India, what is done with the surplus? How is this surplus generated? Are we talking education here, or are we talking business here? I think we need to understand this very clearly before we look at making Telangana, Bangaru Telangana, and doing a lot of service to the field of education. India, everyone knows, is very different. The kind of people we cater to, especially in the public sector through our government schools, etc., very different from what's going on everywhere else in the world. So, just going back to what my dear friend Subbu and what was said about various people on policy, I'd like to say that the new national policy essentially focuses. I mean, my key takeaways as an implementer. See, the policy has been made by guys sitting in Delhi, but we are we are the people who really have to ground it. And this policy, which focuses on creative thinking, not learning by rote, so applied knowledge becomes very important. Emphasis on outcome learning is the core, etc. I find the discussion today is more centered around higher education than any other kind of education, which is, of course, it's a FICCI seminar and the industry would like to look at that. But I feel industry has to also in order to look at school education, in order to sustain any systemic improvement, we've got to start with our schools. And what is the kind of schools we have today in India? Mr. Muralidharan was saying that 40% of schools, of parents, of students go to private schools. And that is a very large number. What sort of regulation is allowed by the private school management when it comes to fees, when it comes to curriculum, when it comes to content? I mean, this is a very long debate and perhaps for another webinar. But so I'm going to essentially be emphasizing on the problems of implementation and my takeaway from that excellent panel discussion. We spoke of light regulation combined with privatization, which in my view essentially has to look at how many people can be reached. It's a very important point. How equitable can education get? Education cannot become elitist in the guise of becoming in the guise of private education, in my opinion. The first set of implementation measures, as an implementer, which I'm going to face when I'm grounding the national education policy, is teachers. The point that Ajit Garu made are human resources. A whole paradigm shift has to happen. A whole paradigm shift has to happen from the bookish to the innovative, from academic to vocational, and industry oriented. And how do we do this? So imagine the kind of training, the kind of the manner in which we will have to address this issue. And for a person who has to implement this, we have a huge group and we are all going to be doing it together. Fiki is going to be helping us there, I'm sure, in doing this. How do we train such a large group of people and tell them that your mindset has to change? How much time do we have? I have 1,26,000 government teachers. And believe me, what we are going to be doing in Telangana is phenomenal. From the from September 1st, because of the COVID situation, an extraordinary pandemic situation where everything is shut down and schools are shut down, in order to continue with education and not have too many learning gaps, what we are going to be doing is we are going to be communicating lessons through television, because television has the largest reach. It is not the smartphone, but it is television. So I'm going to be putting on television today, from the 1st of September, a bunch of lessons, pre-recorded digital content made by my teachers with graphics and everything. Not the very fancy type, but very good, sufficient and adequate. And continue to teach so many children in government schools. Now that is a paradigm shift. And believe me, this was our chief minister's vision. I mean, he said, how can we not allow student education to not be equitable? Everybody has to have access. Private schools are teaching going online, so we need to do this. And from March, preparation of lessons, the entire mindset of a teacher has been changing. You would be amazed. I mean, I would love to invite some of you to come to our studios, the kind of ramshackle buildings that we function from, for various reasons. Now, I will say this is where the private sector comes. By all means, Georgia Tech should come to Telangana. Our policy allows it. And if Government of India allows it, why not? We are now going to be having 5 private universities, and I'm sure more will come into the system, the ecosystem. But how about the private sector also participating in stuff like this? We have humongous infrastructure in our public universities, thousands of acres of land, beautiful buildings. Yes, if we are able to make them corporations, like Professor Jagdish Seth said, or if we are able to sort of ensure that the boards are not just governmental boards, but everybody who invests, or academicians, people with experience in the field of education, and the decisions become more independent of light regulation was also a word which was used, which I so like. I think the best way to ensure that there is a mix and education doesn't become very elitist is that private investment, first of all, comes into our public institutions, number one, and two, they are given space on the management boards so that it can be oriented to industry or it can be oriented in any which way. I mean, the latest courses and other things. And we need to start that. We need to essentially improve on what we have through private investment, giving them a greater say, while also opening private universities, new private universities. The student today is very aspirational. And the student today is not like a student 20, 30 years ago. Let me just tell you, because I'm dealing with the entire education area, school, intermediate, college, higher, engineering, and everything. Um, you know, a boy from when we were in the middle of COVID, we started something called a little teacher, little leader concept. There were no schools, so kids from class 7, class 8, class 9 were asked to make their own lessons, get them vetted through their teachers, and then study in WhatsApp groups, study groups, through cable television in the districts, etc. How else do I reach out to people? What is there for me? I mean, what else do I do? So we did our best. We got as innovative as possible. And that was also our chief minister's vision. I mean, extremely clear that education should be equal to all, available to all, and we'll use COVID as an opportunity to go online, to go digital, to use technology, and then a lot of inputs came in from my dear friend. I think Jayesh is also here from the IT sector. So the student who is very inspirational, you should see the kind of videos they've prepared, the swag, the confidence, the way they spoke English. Awesome. I can only use, I wish I had bought some of those and I would have loved to show them to you. Young kids, all from Zahirabad, from Mehbooabad, from Warangal, I mean, they just pick up words. They watch television, they pick up words, they pick up jargon. I don't want to go on and on about this because I feel very passionately about this. But definitely, I would like to say that when the private sector invests, it has to look into this aspect. Very swanky campuses cost. So getting our public universities to work better by pumping in funds to improve seems less expensive to me than starting everything new. That's one. Curriculum development, content development is another area. E-learning, distance learning, hardware improvements, which are so required, um, are areas of investment, are definitely areas of investment into our current systems. University boards, I agree, have to change. I definitely agree that that is there, but they have to change to become more what Professor Seth referred to as corporational. I agree with that fully. And we have to involve the private sector in a more collaborative manner. We can't say you just put your money in here and can't have a say in anything. That is not right. So that perhaps also has. So we need a hybrid, essentially a hybrid board at the university level or the college level. Siloization then will reduce emphasis on interdisciplinary approach, etc. I'm not pushing public universities. I'm saying this is the first step because we have a lot of infrastructure. See, land is always a problem anywhere in India. Land is expensive. To set up a private university, you need so much land. Of course, you can always go vertical, but even then, university has to look like a university. So we have all that in our existing spaces. I think a mixed approach uh, will be good for us. The state government of Telangana is already looking at opening up education for the private sector. We've started. Of course, I think since at that point of time, government of India was not very clear about how we should go about. Now that there is more clarity in the national education policy, maybe we can have a combination of a local collaborator with a foreign collaborator, etc. It's going to make a huge difference to the quality of education that is being imparted. And considering the quality of students we have, they're really hardworking, they've done well all over the world. I see no reason why a mixed hybridization kind of a system cannot work in higher education, also in school education. It is very interesting that 40% of students, I know, I mean, that is, I think Tyagarajan Garu said, but 70% of schools in America are funded by cities, by their local bodies. So a rich local body has a better school. That's not the case here. That's where the private investor has to come in. We have an entirely different system. So thank you for having me over, and it's been interesting. It's been an eye opener for me in many ways, and since I'm right now in the thick of it, I've gained a lot. Thank you so much. Not an address at all, just sharing a couple of thoughts. Thank you.
Sir, please unmute yourself.
Hold on. I'm already unmuted. Not, can you hear me? Now, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay.
We can hear you, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes. Chitra ji, I think there are 2 points I want to highlight. Number one, I am Ahmedabad Alumni Association running 2 schools in Telangana, in Hyderabad, which many of us are private investments have come, non-profit. Many things we are interestingly doing in a school. We are migrating all our teachers into online. We are given laptops to the teachers free of cost, and we're doing many things. So one time we'll sit down on chair and what we can do. And Mr. B. Mohan Reddy was been there earlier. I think he's still there. His company has also spent a lot of money in taking government schools and running. The only comment I want to say is that we have a stake in the future of India. All of us have. And we need to step forward to collaborate with the government. And therefore, your opening statement that this is the time for collaboration between private and government is a good starting point. And we hope that we co-create a Telangana education policy which will be far, far, far better than NEP. That's my personal interest. And FICCI will be more than happy to do that. I'm going to invite, without much of ado, Naveen Mittal is a good friend of mine, is a very passionate person in higher education and collegiate education. Naveen Garu, I want you to specifically focus on, the time is again limited, on higher education. And more specifically, how do we transform this? We all know our engineering students are not getting jobs. There is a big gap between the ITIs. Like Madam talked about how private sector can participate in ITI. Our ITI policy of private participation has not succeeded. Both of us know that it's the reality. So what can we do in the NEP context, in the context of what Chitraji said about a new beginning? What can we do, 2 or 3 things, a new beginning in higher education in Telangana? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Murli. It's a real pleasure to be here, and very good evening to all the participants. It was really interesting to hear Professor Jagdish Seth talk about the experience in US, and Ma'am Chitra Ramachandran talk about education in its entirety, because she handles it from school to the higher education level. I was not part of the first panel discussion. I was not party to that, but then I think what Professor Jagdish Seth was talking about is really interesting. Only thing what I would say is that India, instead of blindly replicating what is happening in US, has to follow or develop its own model. And I think the new education policy 2020 is a I would say a very right step forward. In fact, some people already talk about that NEP is to education what 91 was to Indian industry in terms of liberalization. I mean, I'll talk about few features which are there. I mean, they've been talked about, but I thought I'll emphasize on a couple of important ones. The first one, which is about regulation, as I said, light but tight. So light but tight regulation. I think the focus of regulation in the past has been lot of control. In fact, it has really shackled Indian education system. But I think the new policy really opens it up. So we expect that more and more autonomy will come to the educational institutions in terms of how they're able to run and operate. Of course, I don't think the corporation or the Section 8 company is a big issue, because today not just trusts but societies, but also Section 8 companies are allowed to start schools. And in fact, in Telangana, under the Private Universities Act, a trust or a society or a Section 8 company, any one of them can start a university. Of course, university is a university. It's an entity of a special kind. We can't call it a corporation, or we can't call it a company or a society or a trust. It's an entity which is established by law. And it has its own governance structure. But the problem in the past has been that there had been too much of outside regulation on it, which didn't really allow it to flower. And I think the new education policy would probably help to move it forward in the right direction. The second thing which is really interesting, which is going to happen, is this whole concept of affiliated colleges. In fact, we really look at the global experience. The concept of affiliated colleges is only in the South Asian continent in the sense probably India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. These are the only countries, to my knowledge, who have these affiliated colleges. And what that has done is that, irrespective of the quality of a college, the degree is given by the affiliating university. So you can have a extremely poor quality college, let's say in Hyderabad, but because it is affiliated to Osmania or JNT University, the students or the college management would get away with that. And there's no real incentive for the college to improve, other than maybe attract a student in number. But there's no inherent weightage or value of that degree from the college perspective. So I think the sooner we do with this affiliating colleges concept, the better it is, and the NEP prescribes a roadmap. Of course, it is a little longer roadmap, but we need to really accelerate that so that the colleges can stand on their own, and then they're made to compete in the market for their degree to have a value. So I think that is the second thing, which is kind of, I would say, a transformative step. The third one is this basic flexibility which is being brought into the whole system. In fact, there has been, as I said, even in the academic side of it, there has been too much of regulation, both from the regulatory entities as well as from the affiliating universities side also. For example, if you talk to few of our autonomous colleges in engineering, they would tell you that if they want to start a new subject, I mean, it's extremely difficult for them to get even that curriculum of that subject through the university administration, because somehow it's shackling. So I think what the new policy is bringing in is a kind of flexibility in academic programs, both for the institution as well as for the students. In fact, students would really be able to design their own degree based on what is their liking, what is their expectation of their career path, what are their career aspirations are, and accordingly they can kind of combine. There's already some work which has happened in the open online education, in the sense both UGC and AICTE now, for last 2 years, they allow 20% of the credits to be done online. But I think there's a huge scope and potential in that regard, because some of our colleges which are in remoter parts of the country or smaller in size, they can really benefit from online programs of some of the best universities in the country. So there's already some talk going on that both UGC and AICTE, they plan to increase it to 40%. Of course, it has been stated in one of the FM's video press conferences, but it has not yet come into in writing. So we're looking forward to that, because that will bring in a lot more flexibility into it. And finally, you talked about internationalization. So I think the NEP is now giving a very good roadmap to internationalization, both from the perspective of foreign institutions coming to India, which is that the top 100 ranked universities of the world, because you can't really have everybody here. So it allows only the top 100 on international rankings, whether it is Times Higher Education ranking or the QS ranking. I think the fine print will come in the regulations which come later on. But the intent is that the best of the universities will be allowed to come into India, which was not there in the past. And I think that would really trigger this huge internationalization which India is waiting for. Parallelly, there are also a lot of policy steps in encouraging foreign students to come in. But foreign students will not come into a program which is not global in outlook. You can't have a 20-year or a 30-year-old curriculum, rigid curriculum, and then expect international students to come in. They will come provided you give them the quality which is having a decent value in the global market. So Professor Shea talked about electronics and talked about the cars. I'm sure that Indian education system can produce world-class material. In fact, some of our, I mean, I would not say our education system has been so bad in the past, because students from here have really done well when they went abroad. And you see the CEOs of some of the largest companies in US, whether it is Google or Microsoft or Adobe, or you name them. I mean, they have gone, or they are the products of Indian education system before they went to US. So we are doing something right. And in fact, I am also reminded of a statement which one of the US president made about mathematics and science. Students in India, in the sense he specifically talked about science and maths, that students in India are waiting to take your jobs because they're extremely good at the school level in science and maths. So this, what I'm saying is, everything is not bad about Indian education system, but the thing has been that it has been too shackled, and I think the NEP rightly identifies it and kind of liberalizes it to a great extent. Of course, it's a good policy intent. The proof of pudding will be in eating, in the sense in how the implementation happens. So we are all looking forward to it. But I really think that it is transformative time. Uh, the, Looking at the pandemic situation which we are facing, and the kind of uh, input which technology has brought into education sector. Madam Ramachandran was talking about it, especially in the school education side. In fact, in the higher education side, the technology infusion is much higher order. So, coupled with technology and coupled with this, some of this right policy recipes, I'm sure that better days ahead.
Thank you, Naveen. I think very interesting point you made about regulation. And then Chitraji also mentioned it. I think we all have to ask one simple question. Can innovation flourish without entrepreneurship? I don't think anywhere in the world I know. I'm maybe a little uneducated here, but innovation and entrepreneurship go together. We need to bring entrepreneurship in the school teacher, the school management, in the college management. And entrepreneurship, by definition, is to have a broad, like you said, light and tight regulation, but gives you freedom to experiment. Experiment is to succeed and fail, right? I think that's the challenge we find in India. There is no scope for experimentation. There is no scope for innovation, primarily because we are putting a layer of regulation. And I'll give you only one example because I'm going to invite our last two speakers. But one point I want to say is that our biggest problem is India is one of the few countries which puts norms both on the output and the input side. We are a very unique country. I've never seen any other country do that. You skill policy, you see government skill scheme, you see there's an input side regulation, output side regulation. Both you have to achieve. And who has to do? Some entrepreneur has to achieve, right? So there are some challenges, and I think we would like to debate. FICCI as an organization, and I specifically in Telangana, we are very, very keen. We believe it's a fundamental for the whole economy, fundamental for the society, and we have an obligation to work with you. Not that we're doing a favor, we have to work with you because we need to create a beautiful future for Telangana. So I'm going to invite Sudhakar to make a short announcement, and then we're going to have a concluding remarks from Professor Seth. You want to say something before I go on? Sudhakar, Professor Seth, do you want to say something, or we want to do it later?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, Navin, your comments are absolutely right. I have always believed that fusion of the two, East and West, is a better model. Rudyard Kipling is wrong when he said East is East, West is West, the twain shall never meet. Have you seen westernization of Asia? All the kids are basically Facebook and Google and whatever they are. And of course, Easternization of the world is taking place. Very important one. I mean, today, if you talk about yoga, meditation, it's all now, everybody is adapting over here. In the US, the data shows that about 6 million Christians are all believing now in Buddhism. Worldwide, it's about 10 million. They believe Buddhism gives the right wisdom, the philosophy, conduct, daily living. And then same thing about technology. I think by leapfrogging the PC revolution, going straight to the cell phone, we have innovated quite a lot. So in fact, that is the excitement for at least the scholars to say, if we come to India, we can learn. This is like Indian Statistical Institute in Calcutta. When I taught in 68 at IIM Calcutta, before the campus was built, I used to cross that place and I would go there. Top British statisticians, Fisher was his name, experimental, will come and spend whole summer to learn from Mahalanobis and C.R. Rao eventually. So you're right, world wants to learn from us also, which is the excitement of many foreign students. Last year, India only had 4,700 American students out of 300,000 that went abroad. Largest went to UK, Italy, Spain, Latin America. There are more students went to Costa Rica and Cuba than they came to India. They come to India to study our ancient literature because the documents are here. But I think we can equally involve them into the most contemporary and the future knowledge. I think we can do it. And I do want to mention Hyderabad is probably one of the best opportunities as a city. I think you need to leverage that as fast as possible because it has everything going for it. As I have understood the city of Hyderabad, I don't think about Telangana total, but it's very important strategic city. It's growing exactly the right way. Educational component has to. education component has to come. Education is the glue. If you look at any major city, is the educational institutions that are the foundation behind, and I think we can blend the two fusion, right? Okay, so you're right, absolutely right. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Jagdish. Now I'm going to invite Sudhakar to make an announcement. I think what Chitraji said earlier, this topic requires a lot of debate, a lot of participation from private sector. We are announcing a special event. I think over to you, Sudhakar. And I want all of you to
Thank you,
be part of
sir.
that.
Thank you. Good evening to all the speakers and attendees once again. I take great pleasure in announcing this event, which is going to be a comprehensive 3-hour event on September 19th on the new national education policy. But this time it's going to be exclusively focused on making Telangana a hub for quality education. With that overriding objective, we are going to have on September 19th a plenary session where we have brilliant speakers who will be focusing on representing various facets of education that they actually dwell in. From there, we'll have 3 parallel sessions. They're called breakout sessions, where we'll be focusing on blended learning, 2 on sustainable education, and 3 on student outcomes. Very often, student outcomes is something which is forgotten and not given enough importance. So we would like to have these 3 one-hour sessions, which means parallelly this will go for 1 hour. And then we'll culminate in another last 1 hour session, which is called closing session, largely focusing on questions and answers and the learnings that we have collected from all these sessions. However, the event is going to end with a suggested action plan for all the stakeholders, namely the institutions, government, regulatory bodies, industry, technology enablers, parents, so on and so forth. So please block your date on September 19th. And these days you are seeing a lot of discussions and webinars on national education policy. But we scheduled it on September 19th. By then, a lot of dust would have settled down, this noise would have gone down, better sense would prevail, and then we can have some quality focus on how we can make Telangana a hub for quality education. Thank you all. See you on September 19th.
Yeah, thank you. Now I'm going to invite my very good friend Jayesh Ranjanji for a concluding remark. Jayesh has been in many ways, he's a thought breaker in an IT industry. In many areas, Jayesh has been a big contributor to thought process. Jayesh, concluding remarks, heard a lot of speakers. Over to you, sir. Audio is not coming. You are done.
Is it audible now?
Sir.
All right. So thank you very much, Mr. Muralidharan. And in the interest of time, I am dispensing with greeting other panelists, etc., by name, though I recognize their brilliant work and their very insightful comments, except to personally acknowledge Professor Jagdish Shet. We had the pleasure of having him speak in the Telangana Distinguished Lecture last year, and extremely delightful to hear his views today. So I also endorse the same view which other speakers mentioned, that while the policy is brilliant, but the worth of the policy will be how well it is implemented. And I would like to just mention 3 areas where implementation will be critical. In fact, if the policy has to tomorrow become a transformative policy, in my opinion, these 3 would be the most critical areas. And if we fail to work out a strategy and an implementation roadmap for these 3, this policy will be nothing different from the Kothari Commission report, which also languished and remained a very good aspirational document, but nothing came out of it. So the 3 points are like this. And again, these points have been spoken of in the policy, but we need to work out the details, and hopefully states will be given the flexibility to do it in their own way. And I look forward to the FICCI Telangana Education Committee seminar, where hopefully who come with lots of deficiencies, shortcomings, etc. So the 3 points which I wanted to focus on. First one is examination reform. See, we all know that a lot of brainless kind of learning happens in colleges, in institutions of higher learning. Just because I have an exam to pass at the end of it, And if I get some 50%, 60%, that is good enough. But how do you bring in reforms in that system so that, first of all, I'm not suggesting at all that evaluation be diluted, but let it be done in a more continuous way. Schools have made that effort. In fact, the CBSE and some of the other good schools in our country have encouraged students to submit assignments, do project work, and so on and so forth. So at the higher education also, the dependence on a year-end exam, which will make your mar your future, that needs to go away. The second very important thing is that at least at the school level, there is some semblance of teachers training. Of course, our special chief secretary ma'am spoke a lot about teachers training from a school's context, but definitely teachers training is required in higher education also. Many students are not able to kind of self-motivate or self-drive themselves into becoming engaged learners because of the quality of teachers. The teachers may have superior knowledge in different subjects, but their ability to engage the students, present useful illustrations, applications, etc., is very limited. And therefore, my very radical suggestion would be that there must be a very strong in-service and new teachers training program for higher education also. And we are very fortunate. Actually, NTU Singapore is willing to train all the faculty of Telangana in AI/ML. Similarly, the Lakshmi Mittal South Asian Institute at Harvard has come forward, has proposed to train 500 faculty. Similarly, University of Pittsburgh, UPitt, has also entered into an MOU with our Higher Education Council in guiding faculty on innovation, entrepreneurship, etc. So teachers training is one area which we should not lose track. Last point, again, many other speakers spoke about it, is about industrial internship and apprenticeships. See, many of us who have gone to good institutions, even there, for example, I went to one of the top business schools of the country, but even my latest classmates, if you ask them, they will be very honest. If they're very candid and honest, they will tell you that they learned more in their jobs rather than in the classrooms. And if that is the reality even of the best students and the most gifted students, why not bring that component very heavily in our higher education curriculum? Why not do a very strong dosage of internship, apprenticeships, etc.? So these three points, the way we implement them, the way we kind of use the NEP to bring these kind of reforms in exams, in teachers training, in internships, etc. These will be very, very game changing and radical ideas. And one other good thing is that this new education policy has come at a time when this pandemic has disrupted the education sector in any way. So this is a time when we should be very bold and very kind of visionary in bringing in these kind of changes. We can always take the shield of COVID and say that this is the need of the hour and hope that it will play out quite well in the long run. But very glad that FICCI has organized this interaction. It's very, very eminent and very perceptive speakers. And I look forward to continuous engagement and support of FICCI Telangana in this sphere. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jagdish. I'm going to close. Audio is not coming to me. Okay, I think I'm going to say thank you so much for everybody. The only thing I want to conclude by saying in a positive way, there are two disruptions happening. One is the digital technology, digital learning technology. That is going to transform, make education more affordable. We in Telangana, we have a big advantage because the government believes in technology. Jayesh is there with IT. So digital technology can transform. The second one is to understand learning as a science. We've never studied learning as a science. For example, what Jayesh said, assessment determines the instructional design. Instructional design determines the syllabus. Syllabus doesn't determine the assessment. Assessment determines the syllabus. So if you have a learning outcome, you write the learning outcome, write the assessment, and from the assessment you write the instructional design and therefore the curriculum. So I'm very glad that we had this conversation. I want to thank lots of people who are there, both in this and outside in the YouTube. Thank you so much and have a nice evening. Good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Professor Sheth. Pleasure
thank
having
you.
you, and we'll see. We'll get in touch with you.